Okay, good afternoon, viewers, and welcome to our channel. I am Olaomi Oloide. Today, we will be discussing the white paper on ending direct provision in Ireland. With me here is Fiona Finn, the CEO of Nasc, the Migrant and Refugee Rights Center, to tell us her views on government plan on ending direct provision in Ireland, and to shed more light on it for us. Welcome, Fiona, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Ola, and thanks very much for having me.
Fiona, could you please tell us what you know about the white paper and its procedures?
Okay, so the white paper has come after the Day report on direct provision. So the white paper is a government paper, and it was developed by the government, and it's looking at, so the idea of it behind it is to, I suppose, set out how the government is planning on ending or abolishing direct provision, what a new system of reception for asylum seekers in Ireland will look like. It deals very much with the accommodation section, not so much with the kind of asylum procedure section, but there's bits of that in there. So it sets out basically a new model for the reception of asylum seekers, and it aims to end the current system of direct provision. They're saying in the lifetime of the government. So I'm guessing we're looking at maybe 2024. It's an ambitious plan that direct would be completely finished would be gone by 2024 and will be fully replaced by a new system. So it sets down what that new system, what its proposals for that new system will be. And the two kind of key pieces in the white paper, they come back to what was in the programme for government. So it basically says that they're going to abolish direct provision and it's going to be replaced by a not-for-profit model. So they're taking out the profit element of it, and it's going to be replaced for a not-for-profit model that's compliant and fully respects the human rights standards of protection applicants that are coming to Ireland to seek asylum. So it's creating a permanent system to replace the current system of direct provision.
And as you know, that the system of direct provision has been in existence for years, and there have been a lot of agitation calling for an end to it, of which the government seems to be all responsive to. And but now the government have decided to put an end to it. And could you please tell us what you think that prompted this sudden decision by the government after years of calling for it to be abolished?
I think it's a number of things. I don't think it's one thing in particular that happened. So I think, like, for years you had NGOs that have been calling for an end for direct provision. And then in 2014, we had a series of protests in a number of direct provision centres across Ireland. And I think that was really critical and crucial because asylum seekers themselves came out and said, you know, we've got nothing to lose. We're going to protest the inhumanity of the system. And then you had, all of a sudden, the media took an interest in it, which I think was important. And you had a very important piece written by Carl O'Brien in the Irish Times. There was a lot of video content in that, and it had the voices of people who were living in the system. So that, and then we had the McMahon report. So there's a number of kind of steps along the way. And then after, but I think the one thing, if you were to point to anything really as to why they've changed their mind, I think all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, after 20 years, nothing was all of a sudden, nothing. But eventually, Irish people sort of started to wake up, started to become more aware of direct provision, because I think for years and years and years, people didn't know or they didn't care. It wasn't ever a kind of a central political issue. Do you know what I mean? It was always over to the side. So kind of working on the issue for years, there'd be, there'd be a lot of attention, say, on a particular centre, on a particular issue for whatever, a couple of weeks or a couple of days, and then it would go away. And then, of course, you had, I do think, and you cannot underestimate the importance of asylum seekers self-organising. So asylum seekers themselves getting out there. So you had the creation of MASI, who are very strong movement of asylum seekers. And also you have the Abolish Direct Provision group. So you have an awful lot of asylum seekers now coming out, and they're supported by Irish people. And their voices are the ones that are to the fore. So I think people have started to listen to those voices. And I think that all of a sudden it became political. So all of a sudden politicians were hearing, when they were canvassing from door to door, people were saying to them, well, what are you going to do about direct provision? And I think for politicians to do something, they won't do anything unless there's votes in it for them. And like for years, people were kind of thinking, oh, asylum seekers can't vote, so it's not an issue. But I think when it started to come into the public consciousness, when it kind of came into the mainstream, I think that was that was a bit of a game changer. And also I think the Green Party being in coalition now with the government, that was one of their kind of, their red lines. So they were not going to do the coalition government unless Abolish Direct Provision formed part of the programme for government. So it's not one thing, it is over and you were part of that fight, Paula, yourself. Do you know what I mean? You have, as a member of Anti-Deportation Ireland, and it's not over. There's no way it's not over. In ways, I suppose, it's almost like, the real fight starts now, or at least it has to absolutely continue, when we have to keep the government. So I don't think it was one thing. I think it was a whole series of things. So it's like 20 years, and we all know change is slow. But what we got to remember is there's a lot of people have gone through that system and have been scarred by that system in that 20-year period.
Okay. Part of the approach, which is that asylum seekers will be staying in the government-owned receptions for 4 months before moving into rented houses. What do you think about the idea? And also, what do you think about that will happen to asylum seekers with unsuccessful applications during and after 4 months of staying in the government-owned receptions?
Okay. So the white paper has, it split the accommodation into stage 1 and stage 2 accommodation. So it was kind of, they've taken that from the day report. So according to the plan, in stage 1 accommodation, they're going to build 4, I think, is it 4 or 6? I can't remember now, 4 or 6 state-owned reception centres or protection applicants. So when people arrive in the country to seek asylum, they will be housed in one of these 4 centres. And the idea behind it is, so within those centres, families will be allowed to cook for themselves, and single people will not be sharing rooms, and families will have their own rooms. So the idea services will be front-loaded to protection applicants. So they'll get information, they'll get English language provision, they'll have the vulnerability assessment, they'll get information and support around their asylum application, their PPS number, everything else that they need to get. And then after that 4 months, they'll be housed in the community. I think theoretically, it's a good plan. It might be a bit long. I mean, in the day report, we had recommended 3 months. So in the day report, we recommended that asylum seekers live in this initial reception centre for 3 months, get a right to work after 3 months, and then move out into the community. So the government report has said 4 months. Of course, that's completely reliant on the fact that there's got to be accommodation available for people to move out to after the 4 months. And people will be given a degree of choice as well as to where they can move to and the type of accommodation they can move to, depending on the availability. So it will work if there's accommodation for people to move on to. But what we need to be very careful is that these new government reception centres don't turn into 4 big direct provision centres if there's no move on accommodation. Do you know what I mean? So each part of the plan is linked to the other. So there is a risk in that, because if there is no accommodation, then people are going to be in these centres, you know. Massey have asked that there's a legal requirement that people leave the centres after the 4 months. But I don't think that's going to, I can't see the government doing that. So I think, you know, in theory, it's reasonable, but I think we have to wait and see what's going to happen in practice. And I think really a sharp eye will have to be kept on the length of time that people are going to be in this, in these initial reception centres, because that's all they're supposed to be, initial reception centres. It cannot turn into a kind of a, you know, a direct provision 2. For people who get their asylum application within that, who get a negative, is that what you asked on their asylum application, within the first 4 months? They haven't answered that. There's no answer in the white paper to that. Now, chances are that rarely see them decided to make a decision within 4 months. That's very unique. But if they did, and if it was a negative, so, you know what I mean? So then you have all the appeals to go through. Do you know what I mean? So I would think the chances of getting a negative and then going through all the appeals process within a 4-month period is very unlikely. Do you know what I mean? Because first of all, you have to have the initial interview. You do the form, you do the interview. That's assessed, the decision comes out. You can appeal for your IPO decision, and then you have an appeal for the IPAT decision. So I'd say the 4 months, it's unlikely, but it may happen. You know, it may happen. It may happen. You could have someone in a Dublin 3, it may happen. My feeling is, and it's only my sense is, that if somebody gets a negative decision, a final negative decision after 4 months, that they probably will not be moved into the community. But I'm not, you know what I mean? I stand to be corrected in that, but I would guess that they wouldn't be moved into the community. But I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. But I do think it's unlikely that anyone will get a decision within 4 months.
Know if they are likely to be allowed access to work or have a rented house after their applications were unsuccessful?
So if the application is completely unsuccessful, so you have, so whatever, after whatever period of time, is it? So after whatever 6 months or a year or whatever, is that what you're talking about?
Whatever.
So
years.
if you have an unsuccessful, okay, so if you're living in the community and you have an unsuccessful application,
if you're living in the government receptions,
or you're living in the government, that's what I'm saying. But like, you've got a 4-month stay there, so I doubt you'll get a final decision after 4 months. But if you did, I don't think you will be given access to housing in the community if you get a final negative when you're in the centre. I can't imagine them doing that. But as I say, the report is silent on that. I'm your signal dropped.
I'm saying, what options do you think they might be left with at that point?
So this is somebody who is in a reception
unsuccessful
center.
Applicants.
Unsuccessful applicants after 4 months, yeah?
After 4 months, and after all the applications made were failed.
Okay. They will be issued with a deportation order.
Deportation
the
order.
only option then for people will be to apply for a revocation of the deportation order. So there is no change to the deportation system.
In assessing work and having a driver's license, I think asylum seekers will be allowed to work after 6 months of seeking asylum. And will the 4 months stayed in the government's own receptions be calculated as part of the 6 months, or will the 6 months start from the day they move into rented houses before they come?
The 6 months starts from the day. Yes, the 6 months starts from the day they arrive. So the clock starts ticking from the day they arrive. So 4 months in a reception system,
And
counts.
2 months.
And then 2 months, and then the right to work. Yeah.
And we would like to know at what stage would they be allowed access to a driver's license?
So we've argued that people should be access to a driver's license immediately. I mean, a driver's license doesn't confer any right of residence on people. So we've asked about that, and they have said, we're going to make driver's license available, but they've been saying that now for the last year, 2 years. So the latest we've heard is that legislation needs to go through the door to grant people a driver's license. I don't understand why that is, but maybe there is a reason. Maybe there is a reason that I've missed. I don't understand it. So apparently there is legislation prepared, and it's with the Minister for Transport and Communications, which is Eamon Ryan. So they're saying that once that's progressed through the door, whatever this legal impediment to granting a full driver's license to asylum seekers is lifted, then they should be able to start to apply for a driver's license when they come in. But I don't know when this is going to happen. I think it has something to do with the fact that when you have a full driver's license, it's classified as an EU identity document. That's what they're arguing. So I don't know what, it doesn't mean anything. It's just
it doesn't mean, but they can access learner's permit.
Yeah, they can access a learner's permit. Yeah. So I honestly, like that, and bank accounts, you know what I mean? I mean, they should be very, very, very easy to resolve. And I do think that they need to resolve these things really quickly, because asylum seekers have been asking for this for years and years. And if they want to show that they're listening to what asylum seekers are saying, and that they're really committed and serious to ending direct provision, then they need to start showing that commitment. So people who are living in the centres will need to see some change, and some change happening really soon, and really quickly. Because I don't understand why you're not allowed to drive. Like what? It doesn't give you a residency right. It doesn't give you a right to reside. It doesn't give you any rights. It just gives you the right to drive your car, And it's absolutely critical as part of the right to work as well, because, people will need to access their car, to drive
move around,
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah, about the weekly allowance, education and healthcare services.
Yeah.
Will they still be entitled to all these things as they will be working? Will education and healthcare services still be free for them?
So, if we start with healthcare, so healthcare, access to healthcare. So people who are working, say living in the community and working, so their access to healthcare will be the same as Irish people's access to healthcare. It'll be no different. So whatever the rules are for Irish citizens to access healthcare, the same rules will apply, and the same income thresholds will apply for asylum seekers to access healthcare. On the education piece, then obviously children in school stays the same. But what they have done, which I think is really positive, and this is one of the really positive changes, is that if people now want to access higher education or further education, like a PLC course in whatever, College of Commerce, St. John's College, the fees, because before people had to pay €3,600 to do a PLC course, the fees have been waived for that. So again, when you're working in the community, the same fee rules. If you're working and you want to attend a course, the same fee rules apply. So I think that's positive. Then they've also...
Yeah, if you're working...
It's the same as it would be for Irish citizens. I don't know what what the rules are. I think at the moment, if you're working or not working, you apply to College of Commerce and you give your PPS number, and there's like a flat rate of fee that you pay, I don't know, 350 or whatever. So I'm assuming that will apply across. So whatever the rules are for people who are not an asylum seeker working and accessing your PLC, your post-leaving cert courses, they'll apply. Now for people trying to go to college, the access to the SUSI grant has improved. So it's 3 years residence, and you can have access to Susie. So that's improved as well, the access to
yeah, so definitely what applies to Iris will apply to asylum seekers working in regards to medical and education. Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
Okay. And regarding the time taken to process
the Susie grant.
Go on.
Just one thing, actually, sorry, Ola. I think the Susie grant just applies to school leavers.
Okay.
So, but I need to double check that. I'll double check that and I'll get back to you on it. All right. So I'm not 100% sure. So I think the Susie grant just applies to people who are doing their leaving cert, but I need to double check that and get back to you.
I think it also applies to matured students. That's if you're on social.
I need to check that.
Okay.
I hope it does, but I wouldn't like to say it does and then find out it doesn't. But I need to just double check that.
Okay. Regarding the time taken to process an application, tell us the possible changes that you think could occur that will be different from what is being experienced now. With the white papers.
So what's happened now, the way the government have been formed, is that almost like the Department of Justice has been split into two. Okay, so you have the direct provision accommodation side is sitting with the Minister for Disability, Integration, Youth, Equality and Children is sitting, and then the application processing side is sitting with the Department of Justice. Okay, so obviously that's kind of going to be problematic because any reforms, like abolishing direct provision, is going to be really dependent on getting the processing times right. You know what I mean? And making sure there's a proper processing, there's a proper process there. So at the moment, so if you look at the white paper, so at the moment, the backlog within the International Protection Office sits at 5,325 applications are waiting at first instance, which is extraordinary. In the International Protection Office. And the current wait times are 17 months. So very few people have come into Ireland to claim asylum in the last year, obviously, because we're in a pandemic. But you could argue that time could have been used to start processing applications. So the white paper on the Department of Justice side is very kind of weak on reforms to the processing piece. So it basically says that they're going to bring in this new computer system as if this new IT system is going to resolve all the issues. And they're going to put in measures to address the backlog. And they're going to do an end-to-end review, which sounds like not enough. But if we look at the Day report had really strong recommendations on how the backlog issue could be dealt with. That included technical stuff about, restructuring the International Protection Office, putting additional resourcing in there, looking at the tribunal, putting additional resourcing in there, extending the term of the tribunal officers. But what the critical thing in there was, what we argued in the Day report is that by the end of 2020, that anybody who had been in the system for 2 years at that point should be granted a permission to remain without prejudice to their asylum application, which meant that people could take the permission to remain and say, well, actually, I'll take permission to remain, but yeah, I would still like my asylum application to be heard. And then anybody who took permission to remain would be granted a residency permission for 5 years. And unaccompanied minor children would also be granted a residency permission for 5 years. And the thinking behind that was that, to try and aid as an acknowledgement that people have been waiting really long times in the system, but also if you want to create a whole new protection system, a whole new accommodation system, it's really hard to do. You know, creating a system for 7,800 people that are currently in it, compared to building a new system with about 3,500 people in it, are two very different things. So what we were trying to argue in Day is almost like kind of clearing the slate. Do you know what I mean? Just literally, let's have a clean slate. Let's just try and get as many people that are currently in the system, give them a residency permission, drastically reduce the numbers so we can start closing direct provision centres and start moving people out of the current centres and you know and into the community. So for me, I think, and for Nasc, that's kind of really going to be a huge area of focus for us, is trying to get a proper solution for people to deal with the backlog. Now, in the Day report, we call it a case processing solution, but what it actually meant is a grant of residency. So we're asking that people who are in the system for 2 years or more be granted a residency permission. They did it as part of the Day report. People who'd been, and it was 5 years in the Day report, or as part of McMahon. So there was about 1,600 people who were granted residency who were 5 years or more in the system, and that included people who were on a deportation order. The sky didn't fall down. It didn't go far enough because there were still thousands of people in the system. But I do think they need to bring in a regularization process or an amnesty or whatever they want to call it to try and resolve the backlog, because otherwise I cannot see the system ever changing, because it's constantly carrying a backlog. And what we can't have is, you know, in 4 years' time, another white paper, another report. You know what I mean? I mean, there have been enough reports now. People know this isn't rocket science. Do you know what I mean? The government knows what they need to do now. So I do think that addressing the backlog effectively is going to be absolutely critical to abolishing direct provision and creating a new system of reception.
And lastly, Fiona, about the asylum seekers that are currently in the DP centers, is there any provision for them by the government that you are aware of, or are there any plans in regards to their stay in the country?
How do you mean? Like, do they stay in the centers in the current system, or do they transition across to the new system? Is it?
Would they be granted stay in the country?
Because that's what we're arguing for. So anyone who's been here for 2 years, who's been in the system for 2 years, should be granted a residency permission. But I mean, that's not, it hasn't happened, but I think it needs to happen, you know? Because otherwise
they are not saying anything about that yet?
No, they're not. They're going to review it and they're going to clear the backlog, but so that's what we're saying, that it's grant a residency permission for people who've been in the system, because that's what the Day report recommended very clearly. So and it asked the government to start doing that last December. And like, if you think about it, because we're in lockdown, there is nobody coming in. It's almost like perfect opportunity for people within the International Protection Office to say, okay, let's start going through the applications and see if, and start granting people who've been here for 2 years or more a residency permission. You know what I mean? And in a way, it's kind of been a missed opportunity because they've been locked down now for a year. You know?
Yeah.
So I think that has to happen, because I can't see the system changing or moving on unless people are granted a residency permission and are allowed to get on with their lives.
Thanks again, Fiona, for shedding more light on this.
Thank you.
Yeah. We've been talking about the white paper on ending direct provision in Ireland with Fiona. Fiona is the CEO of Nasc, the Migrant and Refugee Rights Center. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.